Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Avexis Engage webinar series. My name is Ollie Matthews and I'm part of the team here at Avexis. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today as we dig into a topic that I am confident will be incredibly useful for a lot of our community. How can you use data to genuinely improve your online events? While the reliance on those virtual events has definitely decreased since the pandemic, they still make up an incredibly large proportion of most organizations' event calendars. According to recent data, almost 40% of events are virtual, and the estimated market size for virtual events is over $78 billion worldwide, with annual growth projected to be just under 20% year on year. So they're not going anywhere, and arguably they're going to become more and more important. Whether these are short webinars, day-long workshops, or multi-day conferences, virtual events come in all shapes and sizes, and getting them right is crucial and not always easy. In our session today, we're going to explore how to enhance your virtual events and how to find these answers that we need. We're really going to need an expert to guide us through them. And with that in mind, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Jon Yeo. Jon works with leaders and change makers to understand strategic influence. And during his time as the head of TEDx Melbourne, he dug into YouTube data to really understand what causes someone to pause, rewind, or even abandon a TED talk. He combined this data to better understand how to design for empathy, engagement, and simplify complexity. Jon has been the licensee for TEDx Melbourne since 2009 and is a past national president for Professional Speakers Australia. Jon, hello, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hey Ollie, thanks for inviting me.
So look, let's get straight into these things. Can you give us a little bit more detail then, around that point there I mentioned around you scouring through YouTube data? Why were you doing that? Were you bored? What was it that what drove you to do it, and what did you kind of find?
It's not that complicated. I'm a colossal nerd.
Cool,
Um,
cool, cool, cool. Yeah, you're in good
I'm an
company.
ex-IT guy. And so one of the challenges I had as an ex-IT guy was convincing someone that Y2K was actually a thing. And the only time that before this was before CEOs and had CIOs and CTOs, the only time I got a chance to speak to the CEO when he walked past my office, well, cubicle, to be honest, walked
Yeah.
past my cubicle on the way to his office every morning. And so I got really good at these short sound bites at a level he could understand that got his attention. And I ended up working in the UK, working with traders' machines, convincing them that I needed to take their machine for about 35 minutes. The biggest challenge there is that for every 15 minutes that trader didn't have their computer, they
Mm.
were personally losing £1 million sterling. So there was a bit of a high pressure scenario. And it's all, well,
Yeah.
how am I going to be able to connect and engage with these people?
Mm.
And so kind of wind forward sort of into 2009, the TED data, I could see when someone would pause, rewind, and abandon a video,
Mm.
then I could identify what people did or said that got someone's attention and kept their attention.
Mm.
And then I applied pretty much that same theory through to our events that when they were live. And then in 2019, 2020, we shifted to virtual at that point and were able to continue that type of data-driven insights. And so
Mm.
I guess that's one of the reasons why we're here.
Yeah, fascinating, fascinating. I think it's particularly impressive to be able to convince a trader to give up their trading machine or their Bloomberg for a while. So look, okay, let's start turning the sort of the focus a little bit more onto the event world and the online event world. You and I have spent a lot of time sort of talking previously around how there is genuine sort of insight sitting there in the data that can help people redesign, rethink their online events. And
Yeah.
so, we thought that maybe a good way to sort of structure this discussion is like, let's break it down into the journey a little bit. Let's think about the before, the during, and the after. So if we think about that pre-event side of things, what are some of the lessons there? Like, what can the data help us learn?
I mean, it's going to sound rather harsh, but Sun Tzu from Art of War said, know your enemy more than they know themselves, and you'll want to pity more than want to conquer them. And so I kind of take that in an event context to what is not only the intellectual aspects that our community needs to connect and engage,
Mm.
but how do they viscerally want to interact with us as
Mm.
they do it? Do they genuinely get excited when we launch events? Do they get genuinely excited when they hear from us? Do they feel we're listening, and do they feel we meet their needs and aspirations? What type of data or information or surveys or conversations or any type of data gathering process that you could put in place, even as a friendly chat with stakeholders, that
Mm.
allows you to get the sense or the pulse of the community? And sometimes the timing that becomes important. I'll talk about that in terms of filling events in a moment. But
Mm.
sometimes it's the timing of when you know that information rather than the volume of information. And so it's about knowing the nuances or things to look for. So in
Mm.
terms of what we look for, we're always asking the obvious things. What's important to you? And this is TEDx Melbourne data. So you pick your own data for your events.
Mm.
What's important to you? What are your hobbies and interests? What are you most proud of? What are websites that represent you as a human being? We ask those questions because they're quantitative and qualitative data. And I would
Okay.
argue that as long as you have quantitative and qualitative data, then you have a better, well-rounded sense of not only what they think and do, but what drives them and motivates them. And it's the
Okay.
drive
Yeah.
synergy that you need to understand.
But you want both there. So you want it's not just metrics and sort of numbers. You actually want some sort of qualitative information in there as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then if you are checking in with these people on a regular basis, how many of that community are thinking a certain thing? And how quickly is that idea or concept growing in that community? Because what we found was that we could identify topics and themes 4 to 7 months out before even the community knew it was popular.
Really?
And then we could identify topics when they would peak.
Yep.
And then from that peak, we could work out, well, we knew that 10% of our audience would join our event as long as we mentioned a date. This is no topic, no theme, no whatever. So I knew how many people were interested in certain topics, and I knew how many people would buy a ticket.
Mm.
Now, if I have a room of 200 people, then all I need to do is work out, well, how many people at this ratio would come. And so
Yeah.
before we send our first email, I knew the break even point of our event. And that gives us huge opportunity from a marketing point of view to defocus on let's get people in the room and more focus on let's get people excited that they're coming, or how do we get people to feel like they missed out and that they should buy a ticket next time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we got to the point where our response rate from our community was so strong that we started to break the Eventbrite servers. And
Really?
Eventbrite,
That's a claim to fame, isn't it? Yeah.
yeah. And they said, what are you doing? What are you doing to activate your community? And I gave them all the stats and data.
Yeah.
And they decided, based on that stats and data, that they would set up their head office for Asia Pac in Melbourne. And they wanted to partner with us to
Wow.
create the community around events and
Yeah.
experiences.
So okay, so look, I mean that's really interesting. That then one of the challenges I think in events in general, but particularly online events, which I think people view as a little bit more transactional maybe than an actual in-person event. There's less of a commitment there. Um, there's also that challenge within the event industry, I think, as a whole, where people are signing up to events later, much closer to the event, and there's various reasons behind that. So
Yeah,
let's try and get a bit practical here then. What is it that, someone listening here at home
yeah,
can do when they're now thinking about launching registration for an event that's coming up? What is it that they can do to try and uh, influence that earlier sign up and that stronger commitment?
yeah. Look, as you know, anyone in events knows it can be stressful and intense, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah, yeah.
anything, even 1% difference to take the pressure off that back end event day
Absolutely.
should be invested up front.
Mm.
So, how do you nurture the community? How do you nurture the mindset? How do you nurture the activation? How do you nurture the conversations? How do you nurture the inspirations and aspirations? How do you help people feel like they're heard and understood? What type of conversations and interactions are you happening between events so that
Mm.
you have good quality interaction engagement before the event?
Mm.
If you have momentum, it's easy to keep moving. But if you're going from a standing start, running a new event is always going to be hard work.
Mm.
So the pre-event stuff, I would argue, is almost more important than the event itself. And
Yeah.
then when you
Mm.
get to the event, then there's all sorts of things you can measure during the event that are also quite unique and distinctive. And I guess we can talk about those in a second.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, well, no, go on, please. Dig in.
Great. So one of the things we're constantly measuring is how many people are engaging with our ideas and concepts in real time, and
Mm.
how many people look like they're, I don't know, looking at a second stream or
Yeah.
second screen or board. And we're always managing the ratio of that. And I have team members telling me when we do our mic drop moments, how many people are engaging. And as
Mm.
a ratio, is it 10%? Is it 50%? Is it 70%? Now, once off, you can get away with it. But if you do multiple mic drop moments and you're still not improving engagement, then something's not right. Your programming
Okay.
is right. Your content's not right. Your dynamic's not right. The interaction might not be right. A
Yep.
whole bunch of things. And so what we're looking for is patterns rather than things.
Mm.
And so how do you tell whether they're engaged? Their eyes and their movement. In other
Yeah.
words, were they still and suddenly move? They might have
Yep.
written something. Or were they still and then they suddenly moved? Like, whoa.
Yeah.
So, these are the types of things we're measuring as a ratio on screen. And I have teams that are speaking to me in real time as I'm on stage delivering this
Right.
content. And
Okay. So,
so
okay, yeah. So, sorry, just thinking practically then. So, like, again, you're running a virtual event, or you're running a webinar or something like that. You would have team members looking at the screen, looking at people's reactions and
yeah,
faces, and are they sort of doing the old off the camera? I'm just checking emails, and then what did you just say? That kind of snap back and
exactly.
yeah.
Now,
Okay.
I've learned to do this by myself. It can,
Yeah.
but I would argue that when you're first learning, do it with a team. Think about this in this way. If they're engaged, you have a much better chance of keeping them engaged.
Mm.
If you constantly lose them because you lose momentum, that's where it's hard work. So programming your event dynamic in your event flow and event format are really important. So if you're doing a monologue, maybe it becomes a conversation. Maybe it becomes an interactive. Maybe it's a call response. Maybe it's adding a slide. Maybe it's adding humor. Maybe it's asking a rhetorical question. Maybe it's giving them a challenge. Like,
Mm.
what could you do to change the dynamic at any given moment so it's not static? So there's
Mm.
always a flow to it. Now, you can see that I'm about an arm's length away from the camera. I'm about a
Yeah.
meter from the camera. Now, in any given live event, you're never a meter from someone's face.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, you'd hope not, but yeah.
no, and, and so you can see things like tightening of curls of mouths,
Yeah.
twitches in the eyes,
Yeah.
nanosecond movements of eyebrows. Now, we have 1,500 microfacial movements that, when combined, we call emotion, and we can spot them. And so, the advantage of virtual is you can see every single one's face in real time, respond to your data in the
Yeah.
subtlest ways that will
Yeah.
give you a clue about whether they're paying attention or not. And I would argue that if you're focused on saying what you're saying or delivering what you're delivering, and you're not watching on how they're responding, then you're basically talking at people. And people in,
Yes.
in virtual is the worst thing to do. No one
Mm.
wants that shit on screen.
Mm. Yeah, and look, I think I'm guilty of that as well. You kind of if you're delivering an event and either you're the host or you're the organizer or something like that, you kind of your success metrics are almost did it work okay? Did enough people turn up? From who said that they would turn up? Did the tech work? Was the speaker's audio okay? Were there any breaks in the Wi-Fi? Did we have
Yeah,
enough questions so we can kind of like convince ourselves people were actually listening? It's those really kind of basic things rather than going to that next level down of really analyzing the engagement levels and the interaction.
exactly. We even had a situation where we had a run sheet, what we're going to do, what we wanted to show, and what we wanted people to experience moment by moment. And I
Interesting.
had a migraine, and halfway through the event, I had to step away.
Yeah.
Luckily, one of my volunteers who happened to join at that moment in time, who wasn't part of the planning, didn't know what the topic was even, but had access to the document, came online. I said, read the document. I need you to take over.
Yeah.
He took over and finished our event, and it did not affect our net promoter score.
Which I mean, that's great, and also sort of personally wounded, but you're like, this is the plan works. The plan
Yeah.
works.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it proves you can scale it and it
yeah,
proves you can
yeah,
make it.
Yeah. That's it. And how, TEDx is a global brand, well respected for the quality of its presentations and the engagement, things like that. How long did that take to kind of get to that standard, to that quality? And I guess, and what is sort of the follow up to that? I guess is what's the first step? What's that kind of
Yeah.
baby step we can all take to on that
Yeah.
journey?
Look, I think the basics you can do straight away.
Mm,
And then the awareness of all the variables might take a handful of events. I like
mm.
to do 3 events in the same format before I make any strong judgment, because you
Okay.
kind
Yep.
of work out your own systems and processes and how you work with your team and all those technical things.
Yep.
And then anything above that is really around nuance and maturation. And
Mm,
this is for us, how we stack rank, codify, and prioritize our net promoter score ad lib comments
mm.
be mission critical to us, because we might have someone who, is very vocal, but it's only a small number of people, or
Mm.
a small issue that everyone faces that's really the sand in the shoe that makes the entire event unpleasant. And
Mm.
so we started to use that, and we actually moved our net promoter score from 55 to 98 in 3 months.
Wow.
So, I think it's just knowing not to look for, what to
Yeah.
prioritize, and then what to nuance when you get kind of at the top end.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's kind of how we worked it out. But in terms of what people can do immediately, I think
Yeah.
it's how many things are you going to say throughout the presentation or event that are going to be remarkable or distinctive?
Mm.
And are they evenly paced? Not equally, but are they regularly placed throughout? You don't want people to have to wait, the minute 59 of a 60-minute presentation to get the gee whiz. Right.
Yeah.
At the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
time,
Yeah.
you don't want to be amazing in the first minute and be boring for the rest. So,
Yeah.
how do you pace out your impacts? And then what do you expect the impacts to be? Are they going to be mind blown 10 out of 10? Or is it like, oh, that's rather clever?
Yeah.
Like, that's all. It doesn't have to be anything mind blowing. It kind of like, oh, got a good point. Anyway, and
Yeah.
so, how do you get them to interact viscerally, emotionally, intellectually at any given moment in time? And you want to have them throughout the presentation. And then what you want to do is, when you're expecting a response, how many are responding? 10% are
Mm.
doing it, 20%,
Mm.
50%.
Mm.
Because that will determine to what degree are you increasing engagement, maintaining engagement, or losing engagement.
Is that, just thinking about the sort of the events world that again a lot of our community are involved in day to day. The the speakers that they have either in a virtual event or on stage at an in-person event, they I guess they will have limited time with that person in the lead up. It's very much sort of let's get the right academics in or the right sort of professional experience in on this kind of topic. And I think it's less there's less opportunity to really dive into the craft of how it's going to be presented.
Sure.
Um, Again, this is maybe sort of a little bit unfair, but how do you deal with that situation then?
Yeah. I think there's multiple things. Obviously, we want to be hiring professionals if they're going to be delivering content on our events. And
Mm,
so
mm,
up to us to brief them properly, to help them understand the dynamic and energy that we need to create.
mhm,
You obviously need to know how they present and how they interact. Now, we have situations, and this is TEDx Melbourne to a T. We have 10 people on stage. Yeah, we know them, but are they all going to be successful? Are they all going to deliver? Are they? No, but some are more dynamic, some are more factual, some are funnier, some are more energetic, some are a bit slow, some are a bit more intellectual, some are a bit more. By slow, I meant considered, not slick.
yes. Yeah.
But, so how do we, knowing that these people have certain presentation styles, what do we need to do just before they come on stage, quote unquote, and what do they do afterwards that needs to shift or transition the dynamic so that the flow seems to be continuous? If you
Interesting.
have
Yeah.
someone who's really slow and then really dynamic, that's going to be really contrasty.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's not helpful. But if you want it to be, you try and make it helpful. So it will
Interesting.
affect your
Yeah.
programming or your timing or your placement in the program. And
Yeah.
so while you don't have control over the actual delivery of that individual, you have kind of like puzzle pieces. You already know the picture on that puzzle. How do you get it to slot in with all the other puzzle pieces?
And, and again, so thinking, purely from a sort of a selfish point of view, if I'm a host and I'm then sort of interviewing and introducing things like that, there's a certain that responsibility on me to think about the language I use, the energy I bring
Exactly.
in that introduction, and yeah, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Often you want them to be relaxed and you want to be, but you also want them to be directed. And so I guess you do have a role in directing them.
And with that in mind, is this a nice way to then segue into transitioning from the during the event to the post event? You sort of mentioned about the different puzzle pieces. What about that puzzle piece of a post event?
So before you even start an event, you want to have a sense of what sort of ratings or scores or feedback you want post-event, because
Mm,
you can never measure success unless you have a baseline.
mm,
Even if the baseline is we have no idea, we just want to get some data.
mm, mm.
But after that, you need to start building that data or information. So post-event, it's, you know, how much feedback do you get on the day type thing? I would strongly recommend some sort of survey.
Okay. Yeah,
Different surveys serve different needs. Some people love Net Promoter Score, some people can't stand it.
yeah.
I don't love it, but it has two advantages. Everyone's familiar with it. In other words, out of 10, would you recommend, this? Everyone's familiar with it, and it's really
Mm,
fast. It's like
mm,
10, hit enter, go. And
mm,
so it has two advantages: that it's simple and it's well known. Now, if you have that advantage, then that's probably a good starting point.
mm.
But some surveys and some feedback is more sophisticated. And if you're comfortable administrating that, then go for it. But we run with volunteers, and quick and simple and effective is kind of our rule of the game.
Yeah,
And,
yeah,
I've been doing it for 15 years now, and it seems to be
yeah,
doing the job.
yeah. On that survey side, is there a role for you survey all the audience and you get X
Yeah.
percentage back kind of thing. But then is there a role for some one-on-one discussions with a
Yes.
smaller group to dig a little bit deeper?
Yes, absolutely. So, in any of that feedback, I would always consider garnering any other sort of ad hoc or relational feedback. So, anybody who says something or notes something or puts something up on socials or whatnot, what would you need to do? One of
Mm,
the things you can potentially do before you even run your event, if someone interesting signs up to your event, I would contact them even before the event and go, "Oh, so glad you signed up.
yeah.
I'd love to know what you're thinking, what you're looking for, you know, and then you can compare that. It gives you an excuse to follow up post event,
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
One of the things we gathered in our pre-event was if anyone had, I said websites that what are your hobbies, interests, what are websites represent you, what are you most proud of?
Mm,
Some
mm.
people have the most fascinating job titles, and I'd go, this is a great, what is that? Tell me more about that,
Yeah.
you know? Or I really admire how you did this. Help me understand that more.
Mm,
And I would, we had 1,500 people, 2,000 people come to an event. And I just hand pick a few and just kind of
mm,
just have little phone calls with them. And then I might mention that as an MC during the event.
mm.
Or I might acknowledge or pick a theme and tie it through and go, "Oh, I was speaking to someone before our event. This next speaker is really going to be helpful for them." So we make them feel like they're part of the interaction. And then the post-event stuff then becomes a matter of course. Atlassian has some amazing free information online about how they manage and prioritize net promoter scores. And we use
Oh,
a
interesting.
variation of that. So go look at that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but the information you can glean, like if you've got 10% responding, how do you get it to 15% next time?
Mm,
Or, if you had, a net promoter score of, I don't know, 20, what would be the three things you'd focus on pre-event, during event, and post-event that could get it to 21, 22, 23?
mm,
Knowing that
mm.
it's exponential scale. So that's actually quite a challenge. So, and rather than get the team to focus on everything that comes up in the feedback, maybe what's the one or two things we're going to focus on, and get the team to really nail those two things. And so, if you don't have the time or the resources, prioritize the things that's going to give you the biggest bang for buck. And this is where the
Mm.
post event thinking becomes really important, because you've got to be thoughtful and considerate about how you apply your time, where you spend your money or your time, and then ultimately what you want the new outcome to be.
Mm. It's interesting actually, and it aligns really well with a conversation we had recently with on another webinar around the topic of innovation. Innovation, it's hard. It's just about change. It's going to make things better. And there was that discussion in there about prioritizing impact versus sort of cost. And the things that are going to be higher impact and lower cost,
Yeah.
those are things like, are we doing them and are we doing them as well as we can? Because there's real opportunities there. So yeah, and look, you mentioned that kind of post-event, obviously asking the audience, the community makes perfect sense. And you kind of
Mhm.
started to allude to it a bit there. Like, what do you do internally? What kind of debrief do you then do internally and sort of prepping for next time?
So with the team, we take all that data and we rank it and prioritize it. And then we also rank and prioritize it. Is it easy to do or is it quick to do?
Hmm.
Because, when you've got volunteers, you want momentum. Even if you don't have volunteers, you want momentum. What are the quick wins that are simple to do that's going to have a high impact? Start with those ones. Get those out the door. Get those clean and clear. Then go to the next level and then work out, well, if they're complicated or they require a lot of thinking, then they become little projects.
Mm.
But that way you've got the things that are going to distract you out of the way, the
Yeah.
simple, quick things, and you can kind of sink your teeth into, okay, there's 10 things we can do, but realistically we're going to do two. So what are we going to do? What are the two that we're going to? So then we're building a culture of what we can do as a collective in realistic and coordinated way, rather than 1,000 people running 1,000 directions, getting half the
Mm.
projects done half the time, because
Mm.
that's what often happens. We're so busy trying to get to the next thing that
Mm.
we're really not very deliberate or thoughtful or considered about
Mm.
how we allocate our time and resource and energy.
Mm. Yeah, again, that sort of definitely rings true with that kind of innovation approach of like, to pick something small. And maybe it's an experiment, maybe like, look, we've seen this data, we've seen this trend, we've got an idea for how to get this going in the right direction, but we're not sure if it's going to work. So let's be really clear. We're going to do this and this. We expect to see this change and then measure that and see if it works. If it does, hey, fantastic. This
Yeah.
is great. Let's double down. And if
We
not,
even from
then
our
yeah,
audience go, look, this is an experiment, but we
yeah.
feel that given the feedback and conversation we've had with you, that this is what you want to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so again, sort of we've been through those phases, the pre, the during and the post. Um, are there, from your years of experience, are there any particular, if you had to sort of boil it down to either this piece of advice or this piece of data, that you go, these are the things, these are the things where you should really start. If someone's, sitting at
Yeah.
home watching this and going, okay, great, but
Yeah.
kind of busy at the moment as well. Like, what's that one thing or the two things I can start doing next week?
Yeah.
What would you recommend?
I would summarize it as impact scale and
Hmm.
impact timing. And where the timing, I would argue, is more important than the scale. I'd rather have
Okay.
small, interesting things happen continuously than, an entire event where nothing happens, hoping people will stay till the end.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And you could, um
Especially virtual.
yeah, I was gonna and see if I got this right. Again, from that impact point of view, you could track that across the whole. You could talk about the whole event journey, the pre, the during, and the post. It's not just during the 45-minute webinar. It's actually
Yeah,
the whole journey.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I would think about it the entire journey if you can.
yeah, 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 yeah. John, sadly, our time has come to an end. That's been fascinating. There's so many little tidbits that I can take. Again, very, very selfishly, I've been kind of scribbling notes as you've been going because there's some wonderful pieces of advice there and insight that I'm going to take away and use personally. But look, thank you very much. And I know that we've got more planned in the future as well with you. So we're going to have follow-up sessions. So with some of your advice in mind, we will ask our audience, like, well, what would you like to know next? What else can John dig into more in our next session? But for now, thank you very much indeed, John. We really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thanks for the chat and see you soon.